So let's head off to the phones and welcome in on the first of many guests tonight on this Friday evening. We say hello to John Whittle of the Big Spur. John, happy Friday to you, my friend. How are you doing tonight?
Doing wonderful. Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. No one knows USC athletics any better than you. So when we saw your report a bit earlier today about some of the folks that Ray Tanner has chatted with regards to the coaching search at USC, thought you'd be a perfect guest to kick us off on this Friday. So tell us what you can, what you know about where the search is, I guess, on day 5 now as we hit the end of the week.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go a crazy lot longer. Like, I think it's, I don't want to say it's winding down, but I think we're getting close to winding down, if that makes sense. There are obviously a handful of folks who Ray wanted to talk to and kind of get to know a little bit and see how things line up, and that's happened over the course of this week. So he's been through that, and I think he's getting ready to kind of narrow some things down.
Of the folks that you reported today, how is there in any order, do you think, the Chris Pollard, Wake Forest head coach, Duke's head coach and Chris Pollard, some of the guys that you reported today, do you have an inkling as to which might be the leading candidate at this point?
I don't know for sure. I mean, you mentioned those guys. Monty Lee's in there, Cliff Godwin from East Carolina, Dan McDonald from Louisville, Chris Pollard from Duke, Tom Walter from Wake Forest. Those are kind of the guys who I feel like are all in kind of that league group. I can't tell. I haven't been able to figure out if there's a guy still out there somewhere who might still be playing or we just haven't heard of. I haven't been able to put my finger on any of those kind of guys. I think it's going to come from that group and I haven't felt good about Godwin or McDonald taking this thing. So I don't feel like it's going to be one of those two guys. I think it'll come down to the group of Tom Walter and Chris Pollard and Monty Lee.
John, of Dan McDonald and also Cliff Godwin at East Carolina, you said you don't feel good about them. They're not interested. Ray Tanner's not interested in them. What is your sense there?
With Cliff, he's turned down a lot of gigs. Like he's been very passionate about wanting to stay at East Carolina and get them to Omaha. And word in the college baseball world has always been that he will leave for Ole Miss, but that's just about it. And then with Dan McDonald up at Louisville, I know that he wants to kind of cement his legacy up there. They've stumbled a little bit, but Dan McDonald is Louisville baseball, and I think he wants to get that program back on top and kind of see that one back versus leaving with it being in a not very good place.
John Whittle of the Big Spur with us here this evening, reporting earlier today that he knows Ray Tanner has chatted with Chris Pollard of Duke, Dan McDonald of Louisville, also Tom Walter of Wake Forest, and Landon Powell of North Greenville. Clearly, he doesn't have to talk to Monty Lee, John. I mean, he visits with him, I would imagine, every day. Make the case for and or against Monty Lee. And I guess my question is, if Monty's the guy, why hasn't he already been announced as head coach?
Well, I don't think he's necessarily the far and away guy. Like I think that Ray's wanted to go through this search process and vet some other candidates and see what kind of options are out there, like most athletic directors will do. So like you said, he can kind of talk to Monty whenever he wants to, and he can make that happen whenever he wants to. And I'm sure they've chatted a little bit. They haven't sat down and had a long meeting about, what would you do with this and why did things go wrong here? That to my knowledge has not happened yet. But I do think they've had a few little conversations, little side conversations. And, at the end of the day, like, Monty's got to answer the question, like, you went to Clemson and you were fired from there. Like, why is it going to be different here? And Monty's going to have to answer that question to Ray Tanner, and he's going to have to sit up there if he gets this job at the introductory press conference, and that's probably question number one that he gets asked. So he's got to be ready to answer that one. And, if he doesn't provide a good answer, he's not going to be the head coach at South Carolina. But, he's a South Carolina guy. He's been in this program. He knows what the flaws were here these last 2 years, and should have a pretty decent idea of how to fix it. There's something to be said for having a feel for the program, what's going on with it, and what it needs. There's something to be said for institutional knowledge, and having a great feel for what's going on and what needs to change. So I think those are a few things that are certainly in Monty Lee's favor.
John, do you have an idea as to why maybe it didn't work for him at Clemson? I mean, you look at his first couple of seasons up there, he had things rolling, winning over 40 games, just couldn't ever advance out of the regional. And then the last couple of seasons that he was with the Tigers did not make the NCAA tournament and was ultimately dismissed. Do you have an inkling, Monty probably as well as anybody, do you have an inkling as to why maybe it didn't work for him there?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and that COVID team that they had that has 2 pitchers already in the big leagues and one who was drafted in the 3rd round. That was setting up to be a pretty darn good year for them. But yeah, in terms of what happened those last 2 years, like they had issues like a lot of folks did in 2021 with COVID. 22 wasn't good enough, and missing the tournament 2 straight years is really going to cause you to get a look to be fired. And they had a new athletics director who felt like he could make a splash hire and made the change. And but yeah, I mean they certainly stumbled at the end. And I think, in my opinion, I think Monty was a little bit too loyal to some of his assistants. He probably should have made a change at least the pitching coach position earlier than he did. There were some there were a couple of years right there kind of in the middle where they just didn't recruit quite well enough, lost some guys to the draft, missed on some guys, and just didn't quite have the dudes there late in the year. But he recruited a bunch of those guys that were winning a lot of games last year. Like there was only one position player, one pitcher on last year's Clemson team that ended up faring pretty well that Monty didn't recruit. And almost the entire pitching staff this year that was used by the Tigers was recruited by Monty, and about half of the position players. So he left that program in a decent spot in terms of talent. Just didn't get the opportunity to coach them. But that's a question that we'll all get the answer to, perhaps. If Monty's hired.
John Whittle of the Big Spur with us for a couple of more moments here on Sports Talk. John, what do you believe Ray Tanner's pitch is to, let's just say, Chris Pollard of Duke? Similar program, maybe not quite the resources. Does he throw more money at Chris Pollard? The success that USC's program historically has had, the SEC, what do you think are his pitches to guys who are currently coaching in the ACC on what I guess you would look at as terms of Power 5 level, pretty much on the same plane?
Yeah, I mean, all of those things that you mentioned. I mean, at the end of the day, like South Carolina baseball has a great tradition. They've won national championships. The fan base here is extremely passionate. You get to compete in the best league in the country, and honestly, one with plenty of money. Is Wake Forest gonna fund fully fund baseball if you go to 30 full scholarships? Like that's a question that programs are going to have to start asking themselves is, how are we going to do this in the new landscape of college athletics? And, SEC and Big Ten schools are in, the best position to navigate through some of these things financially. So, there are certainly a lot of things to sell when it comes to South Carolina baseball and South Carolina athletics. And it's not, as you said, it's not necessarily a slam dunk case. Both of those guys have been at those institutions for a really long time, and you don't see baseball coaches hopping around so much when they're content in a place. Look at Cliff Godwin at ECU, for example. So, but you're right. I mean, those are some of the things that you sell.
Another minute or so. How about Landon Powell? How much do you think him coaching at a Division II program, even though he's turned it into a very, very solid one, how much do you think that may help him or probably hurt him in terms of Ray Tanner promoting him and bringing him in as head coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly hurts him. I mean, you look at who Landon is, and I'm not speaking ill of Landon. You look at who he is and what he's done, what he's accomplished as a player, as a coach. It's incredible, and I do think that Landon is great at what he does, and I just don't know that if you're South Carolina baseball, if you can make that hire of that coach. Like I know Ray told him, back when Mark Kingston was eventually hired, like you really need some D1 experience, like in some capacity, and that hasn't happened. So, maybe the Citadel down there, maybe the Winthrop job. It's hard to say. I think he just needs some of that D1 experience, and I know he would argue that point, and I understand where he's coming from. He's had incredible success at that level. He battles D1s for recruits and gets recruits to come to his D2 school over a D1 program. And he's such a legend here. Like I hate to speak out on him in a potentially negative way, but I think that at the end of the day, that's just going to prevent him from getting a head coaching job here. I think he would come here as an assistant, and I think that would be a good hire if whoever the head coach is wants to go down that route. But I just don't think Ray Tanner is going to make that move.
No, I think that's very fair, and I think Landon would understand that. Last minute or so with you, John. When do you anticipate this coming to a head? Do you see something maybe being announced first of next week, or is it possible this carries and drags on into the following week?
I mean, it wouldn't shock me if it's in the next day or two, to be honest with you. It wouldn't shock me. I mean, I think they're getting to that point where you start moving quicker. Like you've had your conversations. You've had the opportunity to figure out what you like, what you don't like, who you think you have the ability to get. I think it's time to start moving pretty quickly, and you need to because the transfer portal's open and kids are starting to visit places and commit places. So you got to move with a sense of urgency, and I think you're at the point where you can if you want to. I wouldn't think it goes past early next week. I think we've got it. I think we have to know something by probably Tuesday at the latest, I would think. But it wouldn't shock me if it happens, a little bit before that. But if it drags on past about Wednesday, then something's gone a little haywire, I think.
You want to be plugged into the Gamecocks, you read John Whittle's stuff at the Big Spur. John, we appreciate the time. Outstanding information. I know you'll be all over this throughout the weekend, and we'll catch up with you again real soon.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you. That's John Whittle of the Big Spur, again, talking today that he knows Ray Tanner has chatted with Chris Pollard of Duke, Dan McDonald of Louisville, and also Tom Walter of Wake Forest, along with conversations with Landon Powell and, of course, the current interim head coach, Monty Lee. And John believes this will come to a head at some point in time, probably in the next 72, 96 hours. So hopefully we'll know something about Gamecock baseball and the direction of the program going into next week.